ha lavorato per molti anni anche allo IAC, il Fab Lab di Barcellona. E, in realtà è tornato a casa dai suoi genitori alla Spezia e si è ammalato lì di otite, non di Covid, ancora meno. Sei ancora più noioso, Massimo. Uno dice hai preso il Covid alla Spezia, invece no. Quindi oggi ci seguirà da internet, non modererà il primo panel, che modererò io al posto suo, ma in realtà volevo fargli spendere due parole su questa giornata e poi con l'ovvio ritardo che avremmo accumulato darei la parola al dottor Bolatto. Però è così, Massimo, se riesci a raccontarci un po' questa giornata, questo evento.
Sì, grazie mille. Ciao, buongiorno a tutti. Mi spiace non poter essere lì, anche perché effettivamente era un po' che ci si stava ragionando, era finalmente un momento per poterci rincontrare, però effettivamente insomma il viaggio avrebbe complicato le cose. Se non altro non è Covid, ma appunto non è neanche una cosa molto di moda quello che ho. Alla fine sono 10 anni effettivamente di tante attività, di tante persone che è difficile riassumere in un giorno, per cui l'idea che avevamo avuto un po' era effettivamente di portare le persone più attive, quelle che avevano risposto, più interessanti. È chiaro che in ogni panel non si riuscirà a riassumere tutto il lavoro fatto, però l'idea era proprio anche non solo di fare il panel, ma avere anche contributi da chiunque, insomma online, anche da lì, per capire effettivamente questi temi, che cosa è stato fatto. E anche l'idea era effettivamente riportare un po', diciamo, rimettere le macchine in movimento, no? Vabbè, sono 2 anni che siamo chiusi in casa, ci si può muovere lentamente, ma effettivamente adesso, avendo 10 anni, è un po' anche l'occasione per rimettere tutto quanto in movimento.
C'è un
Tra l'altro,
documento.
10 anni fa io ero comunque in una terra fredda e inospitale, era la Finlandia, adesso sono in la Liguria, quindi comunque c'è proprio un parallelo fra 10 anni fa.
Ok, ho una domanda per Massimo in realtà. Verrà fuori oggi più volte un report che hai fatto. Massimo ha fatto una ricerca insieme a un altro ragazzo che si chiama Alessandro Ranellucci. Credo che quella ricerca l'abbiate fatta voi due, correggimi se sbaglio, forse c'è anche Bianchini di Milano. Era una ricerca che avete fatto nel 2014 cercando di fotografare questi laboratori che stavano incominciando ad aprire in Italia. È una ricerca che fotografava un mercato, se vogliamo chiamarlo così, o comunque un movimento in grandissima espansione, e espansione che poi ha toccato il suo apice secondo me nel 2015 per poi scendere e stabilizzarsi, come ogni flusso, ogni innovazione. Come vedi adesso quella situazione lì? È la prima domanda. E la seconda, molto breve, poi lo scopriremo durante la giornata, qual è l'obiettivo che possiamo darci per compilare un'analisi di questo mondo oggi?
Sì, erano due ricerche, in realtà una sui laboratori fatta con Luci e una sui maker con Bianchini, Maffei, Carosi, Bombardi. Entrambe le trovate su makersinquiry.org, abbiamo voluto rilasciare tutto open. Erano fatte nel 2014-2015, quindi sì, effettivamente era un po' quando si raggiungeva l'apice. Andrebbero ovviamente rifatti, ci stavo un po' ragionando in realtà sul rifarle, ma sicuramente c'è stato un cambiamento che però non è solo quantitativo, e spesso si è sempre guardato solo al numero di laboratori, il numero di persone, il numero di macchine. Può essere fatta all'inizio quando si cerca di capire che cos'è questo fenomeno, ma ora è anche da vedere un po' dal punto di vista qualitativo, perché magari non ci sono tantissimi laboratori che hanno lavori con imprese o ricerca ad alto livello, però magari quei pochi fanno di un lavoro di qualità che può ispirare tante cose.
Ok, grazie mille Massimo. In realtà i lavori per questa giornata sono iniziati ieri, abbiamo intervistato alcuni ragazzi sulla nostra pagina di Instagram. Uno di questi è Lorenzo Guasti, che lavora per un laboratorio per Indire, che è un dipartimento del MIUR, e lui ci ha raccontato di come questi Fab Lab, che 10 anni fa non esistevano, stavano iniziando ad aprire, adesso ce ne sono tipo 40 soltanto nella regione toscana, nelle scuole. Quindi forse dobbiamo capire in che modo utilizzare quei laboratori lì. Magari non c'è più bisogno di aprirne di nuovi, magari bisogna valorizzare quello che è stato costruito negli anni, magari con un impegno economico importante di digitalizzazione all'interno delle scuole. Detto questo, Massimo, tu rimani lì, ci dici se si sente online, se tutto funziona. Hai ancora una cosa da dire? Vuoi dire una cosa ancora? Ah no, ok. Passare la parola a Guido Bolatto, se vuole spendere due parole, è solo grazie a lui che abbiamo organizzato questo evento. Il microfono, ok, può usare quello? Sì, perfetto.
Grazie. Va. Grazie e buona giornata a tutti intanto. Benvenuti all'evento di oggi che è co-organizzato da Camera di Commercio Torino Incontra. Direi è il segnale vuole essere il segnale di un nuovo inizio, una nuova ripartenza anche per Maker Faire, perché l'obiettivo di oggi è anche un po' quello di dire quest'anno non si è riusciti per una serie di motivi che non stiamo a ripercorrere, a organizzare la Maker Faire 2020 a Torino, ma partiamo 2021 a Torino, ma partiamo per organizzare la 2022 in grande stile, perché vorremmo veramente rilanciare, convinti anche noi che apparentemente dovremmo essere un po' più lontani da questo mondo, no? Perché la Camera di Commercio, lo ricordo sempre, è l'ente pubblico a cui sono iscritte per legge tutte le aziende della provincia di Torino. Quando diciamo tutte, diciamo veramente tutte, dalle grandi imprese alle piccolissime aziende familiari, no? E quindi diciamo apparentemente siamo i più lontani da questo mondo di makers, manettoni, no, un po'. In realtà non è così, in realtà da questo mondo nascono molto spesso imprese, questo mondo che a noi piace anche un po' definire quello degli artigiani digitali, no? È un mondo che contamina poi anche le piccole ma anche le grandi imprese, per questo noi guardiamo a voi, al mondo dei Fab Lab, dei makers in generale, con molta attenzione perché è sicuramente uno dei semi del futuro di questa città e quindi su questo vogliamo investire con la giornata di oggi, ma anche abbiamo investito nel passato e continueremo a farlo. Però non voglio rubare tempo, per cui soprattutto a Bruce, per cui buona giornata e buon lavoro a tutti.
Grazie mille Guido. Inviterei sul palco invece la neoassessora all'innovazione del Comune di Torino, Chiara Foglietta. In realtà la dicitura è molto più lunga e è tutto il peso che hai sulle spalle. Puoi anche sederti, non è obbligatorio stare in piedi. Abbiamo un microfono, ecco. Ok, perfetto, se vuoi, grazie.
Allora, buongiorno a tutte e a tutti. Io vi ringrazio, per me è un onore e anche un'emozione essere qui e portare i saluti della città. Devo dire che le deleghe in effetti sono molto di più di quelle che leggiamo qui, ma fanno da filo conduttore la transizione digitale e la transizione ecologica, temi che leggiamo anche in questi totem oggi. Io c'ero 10 anni fa, per questo ho questa voce qui, perché per me esserci con un cappello diverso oggi è assolutamente un privilegio. È anche un privilegio intervenire prima di Bruce Sterling, che avrà sicuramente delle cose molto più interessanti da dire della sottoscritta, che invece porta solo i saluti istituzionali. Come molti di voi sanno, io nella vita mi occupo di innovazione perché sono ingegnere. Oggi ho il piacere di aver portato con me sia mia nipote che mio figlio, che sono insomma il nostro futuro, ed è per me importante sottolineare come qui, in questi luoghi, e già 10 anni fa si tracciavano delle traiettorie che 10 anni fa erano impensabili, perché io guardavo già solo la stampante 3D e nonostante io arrivassi dal mondo politecnico era l'innovazione, no? Mentre adesso avere una stampante 3D in un laboratorio è pressoché un'abitudine. Lancio l'ultima suggestione, poi passiamo appunto agli interventi più importanti di quello che faccio io. Noto invece che ho notato che negli ultimi anni purtroppo la politica non ha colto appieno tutto quello che fa Toolbox e tutto quello che fa Officina Arduino, tutto quello che fanno questi spazi che fanno la vera rivoluzione, fanno la rivoluzione guardando e avendo come obiettivo il miglioramento della qualità della vita delle cittadine e dei cittadini, perché è solo così che la tecnologia deve essere approcciata. Quindi da parte mia massimo sostegno sempre da qui affinché avrò questo peso di carico di deleghe sulla schiena. Buon lavoro a tutti e buon compleanno. Grazie
mille. Wow. Grazie mille, bellissime parole. Vabbè, niente, introducendo appunto la keynote di stamattina di Bruce Sterling. Devo dare questo microfono, Bruce? No, questo qua. Questo qua. That's your microphone. Lascio la parola a Bruce. Vorrei soltanto fare una precisazione. Qua fuori c'è una mostra, l'Art Maker Gallery, che è stata portata qua da Share Festival, di cui Bruce è un ambasciatore. Abbiamo anche qua Chiara e Yasmina. E se avete delle domande rispetto alla mostra o se avete avete delle richieste rispetto a Share Festival, ci sono loro, oppure c'è il sito sharefestival.it. Grazie.
Well, that's great. Ciao tutti. Okay, thanks for risking your lives to come see me speak English this morning. So yeah, the history and the future of Fab Labs. Okay, it's been 10 years here. I'm a little surprised that I've been in Torino 10 years and actually saw the Fab Lab get started. But I'm going to talk today about the historical roots of fabbing and where I think it's going to go in the near future. So, this book here, see if I can move backwards. Yeah. This book here was the first time that I ever heard of a Fab Lab or the MIT Media Lab. And the Fab Lab is, in fact, from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which is one of the most famous engineering schools in the world. And I knew about them, but I had never been to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology because I'm not from the state of Massachusetts. I'm from the state of Texas. But this book was written by Stuart Brand, who is one of the gurus of cyberpunk. I mean, us cyberpunks, fantascienza writers, we really take Stuart Brand very seriously. He was a publisher, he's a writer, he's a futurist. He's the futurist's futurist. Stuart Brand out of Sausalito, California. Even Apple Computer took Stuart very seriously. So this is Stuart going to MIT, and he's invited to go there to meet people from the MIT Media Lab, and he talks to everybody there, and he does this repertorial book called Media Lab. This is the Italian version of this. And of course, I read this book because of my great admiration for Stuart Brand, the guru. And I was very struck by this image. So this is the Media Lab getting started in 1978, and this is their business pitch. Like, this is what media looks like, and we think in the 21st century, media is going to look like this. Okay, now I happen to be a media guy, and I published my first book in 1978. So I was looking at this, and I'm a novelist, and I thought, okay, I know people in movies, and I know a lot of people in print and publishing, and I even know a little bit about computers, but is it really possible that all these things are going to like vanish into the computer industry, and they'll all be the same principle? I'd better take these guys kind of seriously. I mean, if there's really a laboratory that's working on this, maybe I'd better get to know more about this. Okay, so this is an example of really good American futurism, because this is in fact what really happened. And it kind of explains why the Media Lab has been around for 30 years, inventing all kinds of weird stuff. So that was not, however, the beginning of Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I mean, why did they even dare to have a media lab? Why did they think they could get away with this? Well, it's because of this guy, who's the ancestor of the media lab. They were not disciples of his, but he had a disciple named Claude Shannon, who was a very known information theorist, and Claude Shannon was also from MIT, and the people in Media Lab were disciples of Claude Shannon. So this guy is actually the grandfather of the Media Lab. Not a well-known guy, but you'll notice his books are still in print. This is a brand new book of his essential writings. Vannevar Bush, not super well-known, but one of the most important American technologists and scientists ever. So what was Vannevar Bush up to? Well, Vannevar was an engineer, and he's making various little weird inventions, and he's kind of poor, and he's kind of an intellectual, but he happened to promote this device, which is called the Raytheon S-Tube. This is the Raytheon S-Tube. It's kind of the Arduino of its day. It's an electronic component. And what it did was it allowed people to plug radios into household electronic current. Before the S-Tube was invented, a radio had to have a special battery, and you had to charge it up like an iPhone and then turn on your radio. But when you had a Raytheon S-Tube, engineered by Vannevar Bush, you could just plug your radio into the wall and everybody was happy. And radios, as soon as these tubes were installed in radios, radios exploded across America, and Vannevar Bush became a millionaire. He's a very rich guy, more successful even than Arduino, but he was an electronics component guy. So Vannevar Bush made a lot of money, and he went down to MIT, and he had some discussions with the MIT people. It's like, am I a businessman or am I an academic? And they said, well, we don't want you to be a businessman, but we'll pay you a lot of money and we'll put you in touch with your political sponsors, and we're going to send you to Washington, D.C. so you can hang out with the federal government, which Bush then proceeded to do. So Bush went to Washington as kind of MIT's representative, and he ran a bunch of charities, and he was doing a lot of investment in technology startup stuff. And he happened to know Franklin Delano Roosevelt rather well. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the president of the United States. And Vannevar Bush is a personal friend of his, and he basically becomes the first science advisor to a president. So World War II arrives, and all hell is breaking loose, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt is a wartime president, and Vannevar Bush writes him a message, just writes him a proposal, technical proposal. He says, look, I think we can build an atomic bomb, and I'm going to need a lab to fabricate it, and you're going to need to give me a lot of money. But if we can build this particular weapon, it's going to be orders of magnitude more powerful than any bomb ever built, and this is going to be a world-changing device, and we can win the war with this, and America is going to be in a dominant political position if we can manage to build this device. And Roosevelt reads this proposal, and he thinks it over, and he talks to Bush, and he says, yeah, okay, here's your money. Go build the Fab Lab. He did. This is it. This is the Los Alamos Fab Lab. You can see it's very fab looking. That's the history. This is the ultimate American Fab Lab, really. They built these. Luckily, they didn't build them in time to drop them on Europe. They only dropped them on Japan. It took them a while to build them, but there they are, fabbing the thing. Got it built. Worked great. On time, under budget, atomic bomb, ended World War II, completely disrupted the armaments business. You couldn't build any other bombs after that. These are like ultimate bombs, just kind of wiped them out. The end of that, there's the Fab Lab, a lot of American money there. They could have threw it up in Los Alamos. They had some others, Hanford, one in Tennessee, but this is the biggest one. So this is in the 1940s. You got all the money you want from the president. He tells you, go fab a super weapon. You're from MIT. Bush didn't build it himself, but he hired all the people who built it. He assembled the team. And it was also his idea, and he was the guy who convinced the president to do this, all in secret. But this was MIT. So this is a professor from MIT literally changing the world with a fab project. This is what our world looks like, the post-atomic world. It's why we had a Cold War instead of World War III, all this good stuff. Every nuclear power plant in the world comes from this effort. That's the legacy of Vannevar Bush, and it explains why MIT people get kind of ambitious. There they are today, MIT Media Lab. Follow them on Flickr, lots of them. They're doing all kinds of stuff. They've been at it quite a while, still at it, got lots of money, lots of sponsors. You know, what's the scheme there? Well, the idea is that you, in the MIT Media Lab, you ask for money from corporate sponsors. But the deal is that you make your researches public. You don't open source them, but you open source them to everybody who goes to the lab. So as the founders said, if you give us $500,000, we can build something for you. But if you give us $300,000, we'll share everything that we have and we'll share your stuff too. So that was the secret of the Media Lab. It was a lab where you could walk in if you happen to be one of the sponsors. So that's why it had this kind of early open source feeling about it. They didn't keep everything secret. They didn't make it into a nuclear weapons project. On the contrary, they just kind of opened the doors and let everybody come in. And there it is. This is the actual MIT Media Lab building at MIT. Have I been in there? Yeah. I went in there a couple of times. It looks like a lot of other MIT buildings, except with stranger people in there. There's Neil Gershenfeld. He's one of many Media Lab people, but he's the Fab Lab Media Lab guy. Okay, I'm sure you've seen Neil Gershenfeld talking on video around here because he's always doing Fab Lab things. I happen to have met Gershenfeld a couple of times. Once I was on a jury with him for a couple of days, so I kind of got to know him. He's an educator. You know, he's not a businessman. He's not a technologist. He really is an educator. He always says things like, let's turn this into a learning experience. That's what he says all the time. He's kind of an endearing figure, really. You know, he's really a good teacher. He really arouses your intellectual curiosity, and he really wants to make things into a learning experience. And to him, a Fab Lab is a learning experience. That's what it's for. I mean, he really wants people to go in there and learn. It's not like a place to make a revolution or a place to build an atomic bomb. It's a place where you take a young, gifted student and you put him in there and you stimulate his imagination and you kind of ask him to think big. You can build anything, try anything. Do it this way, do it a different way. Use the open source stuff, collaborate with other people. And you can kind of see some of his charisma in this. He's really an academic visionary, charming guy. But by no means the only MIT Media Lab personality. This is Neri Oxman. You may have never met Neri Oxman, but Neri Oxman is by far the most glamorous MIT Media Lab person. I've been following her career for years. Okay, so she's an architect. And she's hanging out in Media Lab with the best new Media Lab technology. This is a glass 3D printer. Neri Oxman's 3D printer that can print molten glass. Okay, our Fab Lab here in Torino, we can't melt any glass. Super dangerous, okay? It's like going to Venice and they're like making the giant glass things, and like, okay, you could like burn down this building with this device. But Neri Oxman's got them. In fact, she's got like half a dozen because she's got like sponsors in the glass industry and they want her to go out and fab molten glass. So that's Neri's glass machine. That's some pretty top-end Fab Lab hardware. Man, you're melting glass, that's serious. So what happened to Neri? Well, Neri, very charismatic, very intelligent woman, married a hedge fund billionaire. She married a billionaire. She had the billionaire's child. So she quit MIT because she's got $1 billion, literally, several $1 billion. The husband's got several $1 billion. So this is Neri's personal Fab Lab. It's called the Oxman Lab. And it's just a lab where Neri, the wife of a billionaire, can do all the fabbing she wants. This is a kind of oligarch's version of the Torino Fab Lab or Toolbox Coworking. This is like Toolbox one person working. Okay, it's like billionaire's wife. Here she is. She's hired some architects. She's an architect herself, but she hired some other architects. You can see this is kind of the utopia version of Toolbox Coworking. It looks just like Toolbox. I mean, everything's painted white. It's got big square pillars. except it's like luxurious, right? 'Cause she's a billionaire, right? And she's been working on this thing for 4 years. She can just basically throw all the money she wants into it. This is a rich person's fab lab. She hasn't completed it yet. I don't know what she's going to do in there. I don't think she knows what she's going to do in there. I don't understand how this is supposed to work. But basically, somebody turned on the faucet, and a basically infinite amount of money is coming out of the wall. And there it is. Okay, in some ways, this is the future of fab labs for the very rich. This is kind of oligarch, ultra-rich, 2020s kind of fab lab. I'm very interested. I don't know what becomes of this. There's never been a billionaire's fab lab, especially an academic billionaire's fab lab. Okay, so here we are with Carlo Ratti Associati, and this would be Carlo Ratti. Okay, Carlo Ratti happens to be the world's most Turinese Massachusetts Institute of Technology guy. You may not know that Carlo Ratti literally graduated from the Politecnico. He's a Politecnico guy from Torino who left and he joined Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He was like in the media lab as an actual architect. He's like Italy's export who's like living in the MIT media lab. And then he comes back here and he's like building all this stuff. Here he is based in Torino with branches in New York City and London. I'm super interested in Carlo Ratti and what he's up to. He's kind of, it's odd that I never see him in this building. I don't understand why that is. I've met him, I had dinner with him on a couple of occasions. He's not a lot weirder than the other MIT people. That's Carlo, though. This is your version of MIT. This is actual Turinese guy becomes one of them. World famous guy, busy all the time, the website kind of amazing. He's up to all kinds of rubbish in there. Okay, there's Carlo. I pay a lot of attention to Carlo. Every time he does, I'm on his mailing list. Every time he does anything, I'm like watching. Okay, this is the Barcelona people. I've been spending a lot of time in Ibiza because I've got like a grandchild in Ibiza. We got like a baby, the little Spanish baby. So it's like real futurists have grandchildren. Okay, like I'm a real futurist. I have a real grandchild. It's kind of great. But that's kind of in the Barcelona orbit, Ibiza, so I hear a lot from Barcelona over there, and they are the fanatics of fab labs. I mean, the fab lab zealots in Barcelona basically took over the town. So this is them 10 years ago fabbing a house. This is Barcelona's version of Casa Yasmina. If you ever hear of Casa Yasmina, got the little house, has all the plywood furniture in it, cool little plastic objects, our nice little project. These guys did a house, built the whole house, shipped it to Madrid, won architecture awards. Then they have plans for a fab villa. It's like a fab castle. Nobody ever built one. Plans are 10 years old. I'm tempted to, I wish someone would build a fab villa. It's huge. And it's like, it's like a 2-car garage fabbed house. But, the Barcelona people are like more obsessed with fab labs than anybody else in the world. They're more obsessed with fab labs than Torino. They've got more of them. They've got more people working in them. They have more money, more political sponsors. They kind of drank that particular Kool-Aid. They're super into it. I pay attention to them. I worry about them a little. If I'm in Torino, I don't think you ought to do what Barcelona does. I think you ought to watch them and make fresh mistakes. Like do something they're not doing, because they're really kind of nuts about it. Okay, so what gives with little maker spaces and fab labs? Well, in the original kind of maker movement version of a fab lab, everything was very Web 2.0, and it was kind of about sharing open source projects and plans for stuff. But we're in a new decade now, and this decade is very video-centric. It's not really about websites. It's about Zoom and video, and the blogs have become old-fashioned, and people use vernacular video stuff all the time. So this is America's most famous maker movement guy. and that's Adam Savage. So this is Adam Savage sweeping out his Fab Lab. That's Adam Savage's personal Fab Lab. It's called the Adam Savage Cave. And Adam Savage is an American TV star. He was the co-star of the Mythbusters series, and he was trained as a sculptor and a Los Angeles special effects guy. So Adam Savage really gets it about video. He's actually from the TV business, but he's also a maker. So he's kind of a TV maker. And there's a big movement of TV makers who are on YouTube or on Zoom or doing video making because that's what the media structure looks like now. And we got a lot of media, a lot of video in this room here, and I'm streaming somewhere, but these guys are farther ahead than other people. This is Los Angeles special effects moving into the maker scene. This is tested.com. And that's Adam Savage, and you can see how much hardware he's got in there. But you can also see that he's going to a lot of trouble to display all his tools so that the viewer can see them. This is not just a maker space. This is a studio. It's a video studio with FX, with sound recording, with everything else. So here's a colleague of his, Laura Kampf. Laura Kampf is from Cologne. She's European. She's got more of a one-woman game. Laura is very maker style. She's been in Maker Faire Rome and so forth. So Laura's been making stuff in her shop for 10 years, and she does a video every week. So she does a video every week. And if you watch what she's doing, you can see that her maker space is becoming more and more like a television studio. And she's like even inventing ways to like clamp video right onto the work table so you can zoom in on what her hands are doing. She's kind of integrating video into her makerspace in a very intense way. And she's also discovering ways to put all her tools on public display so that her viewers won't get bored, or so that everyone can see what she's doing online. Now, that's kind of a hard life, but she's pretty successful. And she has a business model, and her studio is getting bigger and bigger. I mean, she had no home. She's like a Cologne German punk. She was literally sleeping in her maker space. But then she like made herself a bedroom, and she's made herself places to sleep. And she's really just kind of an amazing contemporary maker creature. Okay, this is the Texas version. Now, I happen to be from Texas. And this is a pair of Texan makers who work in Houston, and they've like moved and they bought a house. They were working in their parents' garage, but then they bought a house, and they've like taken it over, and they're doing sort of everything on video. And they're a husband and wife team, Evan and Caitlin. So that's Evan, the big guy with the beard, and that's Caitlin, his wife. And he's an engineer, and she's a graphic designer. But they decided they were just going to build stuff on YouTube. And they do these kinds of comical things. They also do game streaming and a bunch of other video personality stuff. But they're super popular contemporary American makers who are basically acting. I mean, they do make things, but they're not particularly sophisticated technologists. They're just really popular. I mean, you know, they have a lot of fans, married couples who watch them. They're really cute. You know, they're charismatic. They're actually maker-tainers. They're entertainers who make, as opposed to people who are making stuff and trying to be entertaining. And I suspect they're actually the future. I think that, you know, the trend here is not that the making becomes more sophisticated, it's that making becomes more entertaining. And, you know, that sounds kind of hairy. I mean, if you're a real engineer, maybe that's a problem. But, you know, I myself am a popular entertainer. I mean, I'm a novelist. I'm not a technologist. I write science fiction. I'm not a scientist. So, you know, I'm kind of in their camp. You know, I find them quite cute. I watch all their videos. I think they're great. I should write them fan mail. Okay, now, it wouldn't be a powerful technology if there wasn't something wrong with it. And there is. I mean, I've been watching Fab Labs ever since they got started, and I always thought there would be a terrible Fab Lab scandal someday. Because, you know, it's a digital technology, and all digital technologies have scandals. And normally the scandals come in 4 varieties. There's organized crime, mafia. There's terrorists. There's drug dealers. And there's child pornography. Those are known as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And for about 30 years, anytime you invent something, somebody's always going to say, but what about the children? What if the mafia uses it? Oh, what about the terrorist potential? And so forth. And that rarely happens in Fab Lab. I don't know why. There is no mafia Fab Lab. Why doesn't the mafia have Fab Labs? Why don't they, like, fabricate fake, you know, fake products, for instance? Why don't they just, you know, okay, because there's not enough money. I mean, they're serious businessmen. They want organized crime with a lot of money. They don't fab anything because they just, it doesn't pay them enough. Okay, why isn't there more pornography in Fab Labs? Okay, you could, but it's a stretch and nobody cares and you're not going to get anywhere. So that's kind of a dead letter. What about, you know, organized crime? Okay, they don't work. The drug dealers, why aren't there more drugs in Fab Labs? Why aren't they fabbing cocaine? Why aren't they, you know, fabbing crack stuff? Okay, there's a certain amount of laboratory drug dealing stuff, but nobody needs 3D printers for that. They use chemical stuff. So there's just, you don't ever see any Fab Lab people busted for drugs or for making drug paraphernalia. However, the terrorism kind of has a foot in. And this is a terrorist or freedom fighter, if you want to call him that. And he's in Myanmar, Burma, and he's a rebel against the Burmese government, who are a junta. And he has what's known as a FGC Model 9, and that is a fabricated machine gun. That's a fab machine gun, open source fabricated machine gun. So the arms thing is the one scandal where fabs are kind of there. There are a lot of guys who are into open source and they use all the techniques. They use 3D printers. That's a 3D printed machine gun. I don't doubt you could make one in the Torino Fab Lab. Somebody here wanted to make a weapon. The plans are all out there. They're all open source. None of the parts are specialized. You can buy every part of this weapon out of a hardware store. Go down to the Torino hardware, do it yourself, or Fi to say, you know, it's like go out and hang out at the Brico. Go to the Brico, you could buy everything, fabricate this machine gun. Okay, I don't think anybody's gonna do that, but it's kind of there. And the guy who designed this machine gun, he's actually a 28-year-old genius guy, Kurdish refugee living in Germany. He's dead. They found him dead in his car outside his parents' house. Nobody knows what happened to him. They thought maybe it's a heart attack. Nobody bothered to do an autopsy. The guy who designed this weapon, I think he got liquidated. I'm pretty sure he was done in by the Russian secret services because they are in Syria and they don't like the idea of Kurds having homemade weapons. I think this guy got liquidated because he's an arms dealer. But yeah, I mean, this is part of the future of fabbing. This is the dark side of the future of fabbing, and it's there. It's not all pretty and nice. The best thing about it is that these guns don't work very well. I mean, they're 3D printed, so they kind of melt. They're not really very good. Okay, so you know, what is it with Fab Labs? Okay, Neil Gershenfeld said in one of his more recent books that he thought the future of Fab Labs would be copy shops, that there would be commercial Fab Labs on the corner where you could just dial in anything you wanted to manufacture, and they would commercially manufacture it for a small sum, and then you could take it home. But that didn't actually happen. And you know, why didn't that happen? Why aren't there all kinds of little commercial Fab Labs that are just like a tabaki, you know, like a tobacconist? We just walk in and like 3D print something out of all this plastic, because we got lots, so there's tons of plastic, tons and tons and tons of plastic. So why isn't everything made of plastic really cheaply? Well, it just didn't work out the way Neil Gershenfeld said. I mean, it was an interesting futurist notion. That's not, in fact, what I think is going to happen with Fab Labs. We're not going to see them become commercial. First, because plastic and plywood are not really that attractive as materials. And second, because it's not really easy to train people to use them. I mean, if you go to a copy shop, somebody can start copying stuff in like an hour. But a Fab Lab, to really master everything in a Fab Lab, takes a lot of work. And there are people who will train you for that, but it costs like $5,000 for them just to tell you how to work a 3D printer, a lathe, a laser cutter, and the other kind of standard Fab Lab hardware. It's really kind of a steep learning curve, and it's never become super cheap and super easy. But there certainly is a lot of this plastic. And the plastic is kind of, since Fab Labs are so dependent on plastic, this is kind of a problem. I mean, in Ibiza last week, I was at a Fab Lab, and it's a commercial Fab Lab, and they were being paid or subsidized to take plastic that had washed up on the beaches of Ibiza and try to fab it into products. It's like, look, we're going to recycle this plastic because we have a lot, and we'd like you to fab things. Okay, they're doing their best, but there's so much plastic on the shores of Ibiza that Fab Labs can't possibly get at the work. But it's really interesting. That's just really a peculiar development, not something I expected to see. So, what's the future of fabbing? Barcelona says it's Fab City. And that's kind of the standard. It's like, okay, we're going to fab everything in the town. Okay, it's going to be about distribution, mass manufacturing, circular economy, everything that you see here. The Barcelona people are super into that. If you want to do that in Torino, I think you could. I think you could do it. You've got the political will to do it. You've got the fab to do it. You're not as fanatical about it as Barcelona, but if you wanted to make that happen, I believe you could make it happen. And I would wish good luck to you on that. I'd be very, very interested. Oh, thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Mi dai questo? Grazie mille, Bruce. Ok, non sapevo buona parte delle cose che ho visto, tipo il fucile stampato in 3D mi mancava, anche te forse, sì. 2 minuti e partiamo col primo panel. Mi sposto di qua. 2 minuti giusto per riconfigurare il kernel, come diciamo noi ogni tanto. E partiamo col primo panel che vede coinvolti, quindi vi preparate Aurelio Balestra, Annibale Delia che vedo qua davanti, grandioso, e Massimiliano Cipolletta che è già qua da un po'. Quindi 2 minuti, abbiamo il tempo, chi vuole fa un caffè, insomma, e partiamo.